So, since the dawn of history, humanity has wrestled with the deepest questions about existence, the universe, and life itself, questions we still haven't fully answered, and here humanity splits into three types of people. The first, the vast majority, pretend they already know everything. For every question, they have a comfortable, convenient answer, even if it's wrong. The second, a small minority simply don't care. They live and die without ever asking why. And then somewhere between these two extremes stands the philosopher, someone fully aware that they don't have all the answers, but who refuses to stop searching for them. Today, we're going to meet three of the greatest philosophers in all of human history: Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. And we're going to discover how these three men permanently changed the way humanity thinks. Part 1. Greek society before Socrates. If you've been following this series, we left off at a pivotal crossroads in human thought, the shift from mythological, superstitious thinking toward rational, logical reasoning. That shift began in ancient Greece, led by a group of natural philosophers who started explaining the world through observation and logic rather than myth. But a new question now arises: why did the emergence of Socrates mark such a dramatic leap forward? What exactly did he do that made him so important? To understand that, we need to first look at Greek society just before Socrates appeared. Like most ancient civilizations, Greek society had long been dominated by mythological thinking until around the 6th century BC, when philosophy began to emerge. Natural philosophers started challenging mythology with rational explanations for natural phenomena. Eventually, as we saw in the previous episode, they produced revolutionary ideas, including the concept of the atom. Philosophy began to flourish, especially in Athens, which by the 4th century BC had become the cultural capital and intellectual center of the entire Greek world. As the population grew to love philosophy, they also grew to want it taught to their children. Part 2, the rise of the Sophists. And so, from this intellectual hunger, a new type of figure emerged in Greek society, particularly in Athens: professional philosophy teachers who offered to teach wisdom in exchange for money. These teachers called themselves Sophists, a word that simply means teacher of wisdom. Their story begins with a reasonable observation. Having witnessed the endless debates among natural philosophers about the origin of the universe and natural phenomena, the Sophists concluded, perhaps we should care more about man and his place in society than about the origins of the cosmos. So the Sophists began traveling across Greek cities and colonies, studying human customs, laws, and traditions, and teaching them to anyone willing to pay. But their philosophy carried a dangerous idea. There are no absolute standards. Good and evil, right and wrong. These are all relative concepts defined differently by each society according to its own needs and culture. The most famous expression of this came from the great sophist Protagoras, who declared, "Man is the measure of all things." This idea ignited fierce controversy across Greek society, and it was in the middle of this controversy that one of the greatest philosophers in history stepped forward. Part 3, Socrates and his war against relativism. His name was Socrates, and he flatly rejected the sophist relativism. He believed there had to be absolute standards of right and wrong, but here's what made Socrates a genius: he never wrote a single word. Everything we know about him comes through the writings of his most famous student, Plato. Socrates' entire method was disarmingly simple. He would walk through the streets and marketplaces of Athens, approach ordinary people and ask questions, pretending he didn't know the answers himself. Through dialogue, through argument, through patient questioning, he would guide his conversation partner to a point where they themselves, using their own reason, could distinguish right from wrong. This method became known as Socratic irony, the genius of it. Socrates never taught anyone anything directly. Instead, he created the conditions for people to discover truth on their own. He believed deeply in the power of reason, and that the human mind, when used honestly, is fully capable of distinguishing good from evil. But as with any thinker who threatens those in power, the authorities of Athens turned against him. He was accused of corrupting the youth and undermining tradition. He was sentenced to death. Socrates drank the poison surrounded by his friends and died for the simple crime of encouraging people to think. Part 4, Plato and the world of ideas. With Socrates gone, a new era of philosophy began, what we call the post-Socratic period. And the first to define it was Socrates' most brilliant student, Plato. The death of his teacher shook Plato to his core. It represented for him the most painful contradiction imaginable between the world as it is and the world as it should be. And from that contradiction, Plato's entire philosophy was born. Plato believed that everything we perceive in the physical world, everything we can touch, see, and feel, is temporary, imperfect, and subject to change. But for every physical thing that exists, there is a perfect eternal version of it existing in a parallel realm, the world of ideas. Let me give you a simple example. Why is it that every elephant you've ever seen, whether at a zoo, in a photo, or in the wild, is still recognizable as an elephant? Even if it's missing a tusk or has a broken leg, you still know it's an elephant. Plato's answer: because in the world of ideas, there exists a perfect ideal elephant, and every real elephant we encounter is simply an imperfect reflection of that ideal. This means Plato believed in two worlds. The world of the senses, our physical reality, perceived through our senses, always changing, always imperfect. The world of ideas, an eternal ideal realm of perfect forms, accessible only through the mind. And crucially, Plato believed the mind itself, unlike the body, belongs to that eternal world. Part 5, Aristotle and the Birth of Logic. Now, if while I was explaining Plato's philosophy, a part of you was thinking, this seems a bit too idealistic, a bit disconnected from reality, then congratulations, you were thinking exactly like Aristotle. Aristotle was Plato's most gifted student and his most determined critic. He argued that Plato had turned his back on the real world in favor of an imaginary one. The world of ideas, Aristotle said, was simply unrealistic. So Aristotle did something radical. He got down on his hands and knees and started observing the actual world around him. He studied living creatures, classified organisms, and wrote about the natural world with the precision of a scientific encyclopedia. So precise, in fact, that he became the first biologist in human history. But his greatest achievement was something even more foundational. He invented logic as a formal science. His method was elegant: start with a general rule. At a specific fact, reach a necessary conclusion. All living things die. A horse is a living thing, therefore a horse will die. Simple, yes, but when you scale this method to complex questions, it becomes the foundation of all rational thought, and eventually of all modern science. Aristotle also introduced the concept of the final cause, the idea that everything in nature has a purpose. Rain exists to nourish plants, plants exist to feed animals, animals exist to sustain humans, and behind all of this movement and transformation, Aristotle believed lies a single ultimate source he called the first mover, the original cause of all existence. Outro, and so we arrive at the end of this episode. Of course, I can't claim to have covered everything these three giants produced, but I've tried to bring you their most important ideas and to show you as clearly as possible how Greek philosophy transformed human thought forever. If we connect this episode with the previous one, we can trace a remarkable journey from mythological thinking to rational philosophy, from superstition to logic, from gods explaining thunder to humans explaining biology. That shift didn't just produce great ideas, it produced great methods of thinking, methods that still shape how we see the world today. In the next episode, we'll explore Hellenistic philosophy, the era that came after Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle, bringing the full story of Greek thought to its conclusion. Until then, keep questioning everything.